Okay, so we're in Menachot, Tractate Menachot, Daf 13. So, we started? No, we didn't. Okay, so according to Abaye, why do I need this Mishnah here? So if you will suggest that this Mishnah is necessary, as one can infer from it that if one intended to partake of half an olive bulk the next day and then intended to partake of another half the next day, both from an item whose typical manner is such that one who partakes of it, the Mishnah teaches us that they join together in order to render the offering pegul. So this suggestion can be rejected, but you already learned the halacha in this case from the first clause of the latter clause of the previous Mishnah. As it teaches, half an olive bulk outside and half an olive bulk the next day, the offering is unfit. So one can infer from this that if his intent was to consume half an olive bulk the next day and half an olive bulk the next day, it is pegul. If you suggest that the Mishnah is necessary for a case where one intended to consume and to burn, that is, that the Mishnah teaches us the matter itself, that intent is to consume does not join together with the intent to burn. So this too cannot be. The reason is that from inference of the first clause in the Mishnah, you can already learn the halacha in this case, as it teaches, if one intended to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, the offering is rendered pegul. So this indicates that if his intent was to consume an item whose typical manner is such that one does not consume it, the offering is not rendered pegul. The Gemara explains how the halacha that intent to consume and burn do not combine can be inferred from the Mishnah. Now consider, if when one intended to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, and to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one does not partake of it, you say that his intentions do not join together. Despite the fact that both his intentions referred to consumption, it is necessary for the Mishnah to teach that intentions to consume and to burn do not join together. The Gemara responds, yes, although the Mishnah teaches the halacha of a case where one intended to consume an item typically consumed and to consume an item typically not consumed, it was necessary for the Mishnah to teach the halacha of a case where one intended to eat and to burn. As it might enter your mind to say that there, where one's intentions referred solely to consumption, the halacha is that his intentions do not join together, as he intended to act not in accordance with its typical manner, since he intended to consume that which is not meant to be consumed. So the Gemara continues, but here, where his intent was to consume half an olive bulk and to burn half an olive bulk, where with regard to this half he intends in accordance with its typical manner, and with regard to this half he intends in accordance with its typical manner, one might say that they join together despite the fact that each intention concerns only half an olive bulk. So therefore the Mishnah teaches us that such intentions do not join together, and the Mishnah can be explained even in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. So Hadran alach kol hamenachot. So that is the end of Parak 1. So we start a new Parak here. We're still in Daf 13 Amud Aleph. So the Mishnah says, in the case of a priest who removes a handful from the meal offering with the intent to partake of its remainder or to burn its handful on the next day, Rabbi Yoshi concedes in this instance that it is a case of pegul and he is liable to receive karet for partaking of it. But if the priest's intent was to burn its frankincense the next day, Rabbi Yoshi says the meal offering is unfit, but partaking of it does not include liability to receive karet. And the rabbis say, that's the majority, it is a case of pegul and he is liable to receive karet for partaking of the meal offering. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Yoshi, in what manner does this differ from an animal offering, where if one slaughtered it with the intent to sacrifice the portions consumed on the altar the next day, it is pegul? So Rabbi Yoshi said to the rabbis, there is a difference as in the case of an animal offering. Its blood and its flesh and its portions consumed on the altar are all one entity. Consequently, intent with regard to any one of them renders the entire offering pegul, but the frankincense is not part of the meal offering. So the Gemara then questions the terminology of the Mishnah. Why do I need the Tana to teach that Rabbi Yoshi concedes in this instance? Let the Tana simply state, if one removes the handful from a meal offering with the intent to partake of its remainder or to burn the handful on the next day, Rabbi Yoshi says that the offering is pegul, and one is liable to receive karet for partaking of the remainder. The Gemara elaborates, the reason the Tana... The Gemara responds, it is necessary for the Tana to teach that Rabbi Yoshi concedes because he wants to teach the latter clause of the Mishnah, that if his intent was to burn its frankincense the next day, Rabbi Yoshi says that the meal offering is unfit, but partaking of it does not include liability to receive karet. So the Gemara elaborates, the reason the Tana links the two cases of the Mishnah is lest you say that the reason that Rabbi Yoshi does not render the meal offering pigul is because he holds that one cannot render an offering pigul with intent that concerns only half of its permitting factors. And consequently, since the burning of the handful and the frankincense render the remainder of the meal offering permitted for consumption, then even in the first clause of the Mishnah, where one intends to burn the handful the next day, Rabbi Yoshi should hold that the offering is not rendered pigul, as intent does not refer to the frankincense as well. So, therefore, the Tana teaches us that in this case, Rabbi Yoshi concedes that if the handful is removed with the intent to burn only the handful on the next day, the offering is considered or is rendered pigul. So, the Mishnah teaches that if one removed the handful from a meal offering with the intent to burn its frankincense on the next day, Rabbi Yoshi says that the meal offering is unfit, but partaking of it does not include liability to receive karet. So, concerning this, Reish Lakish says, Rabbi Yoshi would say, this is Rabbi Yoshi's reasoning, a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. In other words, if while performing the rites of a permitting factor, one had intent to perform the rites of a different permitting factor outside of its designated time, the offering is rendered pigul on account of this intent. So Reish Lakish adds, and you would say that you would say the same with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense of the showbread, that a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. And therefore, if the priest burned one of the bowls with the intent to burn the other bowl the next day, the showbread is rendered pigul. The Gemara asks, what is the purpose of this apparently superfluous statement? And you would say the same with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense. Is there reason to assume that Rabbi Yoshi would hold that the showbread is rendered pigul in such a case? The Gemara responds that it is necessary, lest you say that the reason that Rabbi Yoshi holds that there is no pigul in the case of the frankincense is because it is not of the same type as a meal offering. But with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense, which are the same type as each other, one might say that they do render one another pigul. Therefore, Reish Lakish teaches us that in both instances, one permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. The Gemara asks, and can you say that the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yoshi in the case of the frankincense in the Mishnah is not due to the fact that the frankincense is not the same type as the meal offering, but isn't it taught in the latter clause of the Mishnah that the rabbi said to Rabbi Yoshi, in what manner does the frankincense differ from an animal offering, where if one slaughtered it with the intent to sacrifice the portions consumed on the altar the next day it is pigul? And Rabbi Yoshi said to the rabbis, there is difference, as in the case of an animal offering, its blood and its flesh and its portions consumed on the altar are all one entity, but the frankincense is not part of the meal offering. So the Mishnah indicates that according to Rabbi Yoshi, the reason the meal offering is not pigul is because the frankincense is not the same type as the meal offering. So the Gemara explains, what does Rabbi Yoshi mean when he says that the frankincense is not part of the meal offering? He means that it is not part of the preclusion of the meal offering. So the Gemara elaborates, this means that the halacha is not that just as the handful precludes the remainder, that as long as the handful is not burned, the remainder may not be consumed, so too the handful precludes the frankincense from being burned upon the altar. Rather, if the priest wants, he burns the first, and if he wants, he burns the first. He may burn the frankincense before or after the burning of the handful. Accordingly, the frankincense is an independent permitting factor. For this reason, intent with regard to frankincense that occurred during the removal of the handful does not render a meal offering pigul. The Gemara asks, in the rabbis who say that the meal offering is rendered pigul, in such a case, what is their opinion? So the Gemara responds, they hold that when we say that a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul, this is with regard to the case taught in the Mishnah, 16a, concerning one who slaughtered one of the lambs, whose sacrifice permits the consumption of the 2 loaves, a meal offering brought on Shavuot, with the intent to partake of the other lamb the next day. So the Gemara elaborates, when you said in the Mishnah that both permitting factors are fit, this statement applies only where they were not fixed in one vessel. But in a situation where they were fixed in one vessel, as in the case with regard to the handful of the frankincense, they are considered like one unit, and therefore they render one another pigul. Okay, and with regard to frankincense, Rabbi Yannai says, the collection of the frankincense from a meal offering, when performed by a non-priest, is not valid and disqualifies the meal offering. The Gemara asks, what is the reason? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, it is because the rite of conveying has touched it. That is, the collection of the frankincense is considered part of the rite of the conveying of the frankincense to the altar for the purpose of burning. So if the non-priest simply collected the frankincense and thereafter transferred it to a priest, Rabbi Yonai holds that conveying even without moving one's leg is called conveying, and the halacha is that the performance of the rite of conveying by a non-priest is not valid. So Rav Mari, Rav Mari said, we learned this halacha in the Mishnah on 12a, which discusses those sacrificial rites of a meal offering during which improper intent renders an offering pigul as well. So the Mishnah teaches, this is the principle. In the case of anyone who removes the handful or places the handful in the vessel, or who conveys the vessel with the handful to the altar, or who burns the handful on the altar, with the intent to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, or to burn an item whose typical manner is such that one burns it on the altar, outside its designated area, the meal offering is unfit, but there is no liability for karet. So if his intent was to perform any of these actions beyond their designated time, the offering is pigul, and one is liable to receive karet on account of it, provided that the permitting factor, the handful, was sacrificed in accordance with its mitzvah. Rav Mari analyzes the first part of the Mishnah. Granted, the removal of the handful from a meal offering is the same as, that is equivalent to, the slaughter of an animal offerings. The conveying of the handful to the altar in order to burn it is also the same as conveying of the blood of a slaughtered offering to the altar in order to sprinkle it. Similarly, the burning of the handful in frankincense of a meal offering is comparable to the sprinkling of the blood of a slaughtered offering upon the altar. But as for placing the handful in the service vessel, what rite is he performing that is comparable to the rite of slaughtered offerings? If we say that the meal offering is pigul because the placing of the handful into a vessel is comparable to the collection of the blood of a slaughtered offering into a service vessel, one can say, are these rites in fact comparable? There, in the case of animal offerings, the blood enters the vessel by itself, whereas here the priest takes the handful from the meal offering and casts it into the vessel. Rather, it must be due to the following reason. Since it is not possible to sacrifice the handful without first performing the act of placing it in the vessel, the placement of the handful in a vessel is considered a significant rite, and perforce this factor causes it to be considered like the collection of the blood. Here too, with regard to the collection of the frankincense, since it is not possible to sacrifice the frankincense without first performing the act of collecting it from the vessel, the collection of the frankincense is a significant rite that perforce causes it to be considered like the rite of conveying. So the Gemara rejects this suggestion. It says, no, this is not the reason, and one cannot prove from the Mishnah that the collection of the frankincense from a meal offering performed by a non-priest is not valid. Actually, the reason why intent during the placement of the handful renders the offering pigul is in fact because it is comparable to the collection of the blood of a slaughtered offering. And as for the difficulty you raised, that the blood enters the vessel by itself, whereas here he takes the handful from the meal offering and casts it onto the vessel. This is not a true difficulty. The Gemara explains, now consider both of them. The collection of blood and the placing of the handful involve sanctity of the vessel, in which the service vessel sanctifies a permitting factor to the altar, either the handful or the blood. What difference is it to me if the permitting factor enters the vessel by itself, or whether one takes the item and casts it into the vessel. So if one slaughtered the 2 lambs that accompanied the 2 meal offering loaves sacrificed on Shavuot with the intent to partake of one of the 2 loaves the next day, or if one burned the 2 bowls of frankincense accompanying the showbread with the intent to partake of one of the arrangements of the showbread the next day, Rabbi Yoshi says that loaf and that arrangement of which he intended to partake the next day are pigul, and one is liable to receive karet for their consumption, and the second loaf and arrangement are unfit, but there is no liability to receive karet for their consumption. And the rabbis say this loaf and arrangement and that loaf and arrangement are both pigul, and one is liable to receive karet for their consumption. So Rav Huna says, Rabbi Yoshi would say, in accordance with whose opinion that intent of pigul with regard to one loaf or one arrangement does not render the second loaf or arrangement pigul. That if one had intent of pigul with regard to the right thigh, he slaughtered an offering with the intent to partake of the right thigh the next day, then the left thigh has not become pigul, and one is not liable to receive karet for its consumption. So what is the reason for this? If you wish, propose a logical argument, and if you wish, cite a verse. So Rav Huna elaborates. He says, if you wish, propose a logical argument. Disqualifying intent is no stronger than an accident of ritual impurity. And if one limb of an offering became impure, did the entire offering then become impure? Accordingly, one limb can be rendered pigul without the other. And if you wish, cite a verse that addresses pigul. It says, Leviticus 7:18, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity. The verse indicates the one who eats specifically of it, that is from one part, shall bear his iniquity, and one who eats from the other part of the offering. The verse indicates the one who eats specifically of it, that is from one part, shall bear his iniquity, and not eat one who eats from the other part of the offering. So Rav Nachman raised an objection to Rav Huna from a Braita, and the rabbis say there is never liability to receive karet for partaking of the two loaves unless one has intent of pigul with regard to an olive bulk of both of them. So that is, one's intent renders both loaves pigul only if he slaughters the lambs with the intent to consume an amount equal to an olive bulk from both loaves combined outside their proper time. So one can infer from this that if he had intent with regard to both of them, yes, both loaves are pigul, but if his intent was with regard to only one of them, no, the other loaf is not pigul. So Rav Nachman continues, in accordance with whose opinion is the Braita? If we say that it is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, the majority of the Mishnah, then even if his intent was with regard to only one of them, both loaves are rendered pigul. Rather, it is obvious that the Braita is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yoshi. Now granted, if you say that according to Rabbi Yoshi, the left and right thighs of an offering are considered one body, and consequently pigul intent with regard to one thigh renders the other thigh pigul as well, then due to that reason, it is understandable that if the pigul intent was for an amount equal to one total olive bulk from both of the loaves, then the intent with regard to each loaf is combined with the other. And that is the end of Daf 13.